Hey, welcome to yet again another BYP Responds video. I'm going to be responding to the BYU Religious Studies group. There's Robert Millett. I can't remember the name of the gal. I apologize, ma'am. Richard Draper, whom I'm going to be directly responding to in this video. And then they have Michael Dennis Rhodes and Robert Millett and others. And Michael Dennis Rhodes. I love this subject. They're talking about the facsimiles of the Book of Abraham. And I mean, this is my favorite subject. The crazy thing is, it was my favorite subject as an apologist as well. But the apologists don't have a thing. They are bankrupt. I'm sorry if that offends any of you Mormons and you apologists, but you're bankrupt. We have all the evidence. We have all the analysis. Seriously. So let's take a look. I'm not going to sit here and blubber on about how we can trounce every single argument. I'm going to show you that we can trounce every single argument, especially this ridiculous one that Richard Draper brings up.
Let's talk a bit then about what in some people's minds is fascinating and in other people's minds is rather controversial, namely the facsimiles. Someone suggested in our conversation before this meeting that one of the unusual things about the Book of Abraham is it's a book of scripture that brings its own pictures. What are the facsimiles and what do they have to do with the text of the Book of Abraham? Who wants to start us off?
One of the things we can say, if there's a book that begins with a bang, it's the Pearl of Great Price Book of Abraham, because the first picture is that of a sacrifice. We've got a sacrifice.
So we have the attention of the reader right away.
Yeah,
That is stupidly, laughably wrong. Now, the remarkable thing about this, they sat down together and had this discussion 10 years ago. Robert Rittner published his book 4 years before these gentlemen and that lady sat down to have this discussion. True to form, they never mentioned Rittner. Here's the interesting thing about this idea of facsimile number one being a sacrifice. Joseph Smith's theology incorrectly proposes Abraham was attempted to be sacrificed in Egypt when he went down to Egypt. Facsimile number one is a picture, there it is, of the priest with a knife attempting to sacrifice Joseph Smith on the altar. Michael Dennis Rhodes, in a Conference of Egyptologists, and Rittner does talk about this in this book, called the lion couch an altar, and it raised the ire of all the Egyptologists. And they knew where he was going with it. It is not an altar of sacrifice. Now, the church, quite a few years ago, published in an effort to become more open with its history, its theology, its doctrines. It published an essay on the Book of Abraham with the intent of, let's get to the actual state of affairs with the Book of Abraham and the facsimiles. They published this essay. The essay caught the attention of Robert Rittner. One, they never asked for his input as an Egyptologist with this Egyptological document. Now, of course, the Mormon apologists are under no obligation whatsoever to ask any help from any Egyptologist. We get that. It's all good. It's all good. The basis of the essay rested upon the scholarship and research, not a revelation from the prophet in order to get us what is going on with the Book of Abraham, with the most solid source, but with a couple of really, okay, calm down, with a couple of the LDS Egyptologists, Kerry Mulstein and John Gee. Robert Rittner analyzes the church's essays utilization of the scholarship of Kerry Mulstein and John Gee, to which Robert Rittner responded in an article, Translation and Historicity of the Book of Abraham. That was the title of the church essay, presumably still found on the official church website. This is Robert Rittner's response to the essay. And I'm not going to go through it all. I want to focus on two items of one, Kerry Mulstein, the LDS reaction to various different sundry issues of problems with translation, with the relationship of the Book of Abraham to the papyri, as well as Joseph Smith's explanations of what the facsimiles themselves meant. They confined themselves to a few citations, Rittner says, in the section on the Book of Abraham and the ancient world. The essays have footnotes where they indicate which LDS piece of scholarship and legerdemain they utilized. A brief response to some of these is in order, and Rittner rises to the occasion. The posting cites the work of Kerry Mulstein. That would be in note 36. Now, this citation is very interesting because it is to Kerry Mulstein's publication called Violence in the Service of Order, the Religious Framework for Sanctioned Killing in Ancient Egypt, 2011. It is on the basis of this information, which was going to be peer-reviewed by Egyptologists, that whenever Kerry Mulstein discusses the idea of human sacrifice in ancient Egypt, in order to verify that facsimile number 1 is depicting the human sacrifice of Abraham on the altar by the priest of Pharaoh, this is the publication that Mulstein relies on to demonstrate Joseph Smith's interpretation is correct. Here is Robert Rittner's analysis. It's brief. He does more analysis in here, as well as in other articles out of the Journal of Near Eastern Studies and the Dialogue, etc. I'm just going to focus on this one for the time being, for lack of time. He uses this in an attempt to prove that the religious-based human sacrifice at the order of Pharaoh, as described in Abraham 1, verses 11 and 12, is an example of punishment now known to have been meted out during the Abrahamic era, end quote. Now, whether or not Mulstein expected to find such proof when he began his doctoral study, the title of the published volume intentionally avoids the term human sacrifice in favor of the words sanctioned killing, and the thesis forthrightly concludes that rebellion was the chief motive. Rebellion was the chief motive for these executions. This is found on Mulstein, pages 80 and 82. So Mulstein also rightly notes the complexity in distinguishing the civil terms execution or capital punishment from the more overtly religious term of human sacrifice, pages 5 through 8. Particularly in a society where political and religious issues are not sharply distinguished. Okay, so that ambiguity could be argued for the modern United States as well, however, since civil execution for murder is often linked to condemnation for killing in the Ten Commandments, a distinctly religious text. So more to the point, however, while Molstein notes that capital punishment for political rebellion and crimes against individuals and the state, including the theft of temple property or resources, there is no parallel to the Book of Abraham intended, quote, martyrdom, unquote, for refusing to worship the images of Egyptian gods. That is the reason, that is the explanation that Joseph Smith proposed for facsimile number 1, for the reason Abraham is in the situation he is, because he refused to bow down and worship the dumb idols. Molstein does not show that was the cause of human sacrifice in Egypt, so there is no parallel to the Book of Abraham, is Robert Rittner's conclusion. So that would happen under the Roman persecutions of Christians, but this is a much later era. However, this theme of personal worship, or the refusal of personal worship, was not a basic concern of the ancient Egyptian state. So the LDS citation of Molstein's work does not support the narrative of the Book of Abraham. Very important point. Now moving on to John Gee, and this is where it gets really juicy. As you can expect, Robert Rittner was John Gee's thesis advisor. He taught Gee Egyptian. So this web posting of the church essay now notes also 2 writings by John Gee in notes 44 and 45 in the essay. Okay, so these are purporting to prove a memory of the sacrifice of these are purporting to prove a memory of the sacrifice of Abraham by Pharaoh in later Egypt. Okay, the sources that Gee is using is going to show it is a memory of Pharaoh wanting to sacrifice Abraham. Okay, that's what Gee is proposing in this essay, the church essay. I just want to make it clear. Rittner is rebutting that. Well, it's not fully accurate to claim that the 3rd century, that's 300 AD text, the Demotic Papyrus that Gee is citing, it's not exactly accurate to claim that it connects Abraham to facsimile number 1, like John Gee is trying to do. The text in question, now this text does exist. It's a Leiden magical papyrus. It is in Demotic Egyptian and Greek, and it does include a picture of a mummy attended by Anubis. It's mentioned by name on a lion funerary couch, not an altar. It's a funerary couch. But the text is a love compulsion spell intended to force a woman to submit to a male's sexual lust. It's not a reflection of the Book of Abraham. And yes, it is accompanied by magical words of power that the speaker recites. Adio oryx thambito Abraham o epi plani gi bayoth, etc. Well, this string of abracadabra words does include the name Abram, and this spelling has been corrected to Abraham in the recent edition. However, the name is just one in a string of magical names and is no more relevant to the image than Oryx Thambito or Planio Gibeoth. Moreover, there is no intent here in this Leiden magical papyrus to illustrate a sacrifice of a human. Just Osiris tended by Anubis, is what we see. And they are both invoked to inflame the libido of the female victim of the magical spell that this is talking about. The body on the couch bed is certainly that of the deceased Osiris, as it is Hor's vignette. It's not a threatened Abraham. And actually, in another illustration, I think that Guy used, the figure on the lion couch is a woman, not a man. Very interesting. So in combination with other borrowed Old Testament names, Abraham in varying spellings, it occurs as a name of power throughout the Greek magical papyri, but there's no special connection with the lion bed, though. But it is a name of power. So in the PGM5 line 481, the magician invokes Zeus by declaring, "For I am Silfachuk Lelum." Sorry, I can't pronounce this crap. I'm mixing in the middle of the list a snippet of the Jewish blessing. Baruch Adonai Eloi Abram. Blessed be Yahweh, God of Abraham. Well, in this text on line 315, the famous name Abram begins a string of protective names combining Bes, Iabeoth, and the son of the female falcon. So most commonly, the name Abram in the magical papyri is invoked along with Isaac and Jacob. Of course, these really are the biblical patriarchs that the Greek magical papyri is using their names. They knew that. As in the long list of the magical names in PGM 12, line 287, Safta Nuchitha Abram Isaac Iacobi, or the probable Targum extract in this other text, 13, line 976. This papyri also protects against the evil eye by declaring among a string of magical names, here's what it says. So you're invoking the magical names and then you pronounce the spell. Yeah? So here's what it says. I have received the power of Abram, Isaac, and Yaakov, and of the great God Daimon Iao, which is Yahweh. Iao. It's just a defective spelling. Very interesting. This is according to Betts in the Greek magical papyri. Now, another love compulsion spell invokes the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah and concludes with a list of names which mixes the archangels, the abracadabra words, and Abraham. I adjure you by the great Paptafeo Sabaoth Arbathio Zagur Pagori, and by the great Michael Zuriel Gabriel Sensen Gen Bar Farangis Israel Abram, attract her to me. See, that's the spell. And they're cramming in as many names or words of power and influence that they can cram in order to get this spell to work. The use of the name Abram or Abraham in all of these magical passages derives from late Egyptian knowledge of the Hebrew Bible and of contemporary Jewish tradition, not from an apocryphal book of Abraham. So, Guy's second proposed piece of evidence for the book of Abraham is so utterly preposterous that I can't help but think this destroyed his own career. It absolutely eliminated any credibility he had in the world of Egyptology with actual Egyptologists. Now, of course, among the Mormon Egyptologists and the Mormon apologists, they still genuflect to John Gee, except Brian Howard. Once he retired, he said Gee and Mulstein, those guys are completely off base, and they're nut jobs. Oh, hold on. Hey, Don, I'm in the middle of recording a video. Can I call you right back here in just about 10 minutes? Call me back when you can sometime today or tonight, okay? Yeah. I'd love to. Yeah, okay. All right. Call me a little later. Thanks, man. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I don't know enough about it just yet, so probably not. Is I'm thinking, but yeah, I'd love to get your ideas on it. Unless you want to come on the show tomorrow night and talk about it. Short. You wouldn't what? Yeah, well, that'd be great. Whatever, we'll work it out. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I invited her to come to the show, and she's not sure she can. Yeah, so right. Okay, awesome. Call me back when you can. You bet. See ya. Oh, my good and dear friend Don Bradley, a good source. I like him. Now, where was I before I was so rudely interrupted by such a dear friend? He didn't mean to. It just goes to show you I do have contacts with good scholars, right? So anyway, this second piece of evidence, well, I'll put it this way. It destroyed any credibility John Gee ever had with me, without question. I mean, there was enough already, but this takes the cake. And I feel sorry for him, I think. He's the one that made his bed. He has to sleep in it. Okay. So now Gee's second proposed evidence of an Egyptian view of Abraham. Well, this is even less defensible. Now listen to what Gee did. This can't be anything but deliberate deception, and that's what makes this story so sad for him. But what other choice is there really? I mean, let's get on the level, to use the Master Mason's concept. Let's be on the level. They have nothing in favor of the book of Abraham. So they have to really distort the evidence in order to hope there's enough of a contact to have a hit for Joseph Smith. Let me show you what I mean. So the text here, and this is in the church essay. This text that Gee presents is a Sahidic Coptic panegyric praising a Christian saint, copied in the 12th century or somewhat earlier. So the text is found in 3 copies. The Clarendon Press Fragment 65, the British Museum OR 3581B, and the Zoga Borgia Fragment 222. And a combined scholarly edition was published by E.O. Winstedt in 1908. Okay, so there's the technical layout of the background. Okay. None of this, I don't think, if I remember right, is mentioned in the essay. So, this Christian tale recounts the attempted martyrdom of a saint, but not necessarily the patriarch Abraham, who is cast into a fiery furnace. As Winstedt discussed over 2 entire pages in careful analysis that Guy intentionally fails to note, if this Abraham were the patriarch, then the story presented is based on a legend recognized to be of Persian origin. The tradition that Abraham was cast into a fiery furnace by Nimrod. So, both Winstedt and the great Coptic scholar W.E. Crum, however, showed that the more likely identification is with the Persian-era martyrdom Abraham, Bishop of Arbela, modern Erbil in Iraq, who was beheaded for his Christian faith in 348 under the Sasanian Persian ruler Shapur II. This identification is proved by the Coptic text itself. Here's the Coptic text. And when they cast Abraham into the fire, and the angel of the Lord came straightway to him, and he saved him from the fire. It did not touch him at all. And his fame went forth in the whole land of Mesopotamia, because his God saved him from the fire of Sabor the king. And wouldn't your fame spread, right? Well, the Coptic text is not an original Egyptian story, but it's based on Greek, and it's written after the Arabian conquest. Greek transcribes SH as simply S, and under Arabic influence, later Egyptian Coptics substitutes B for P, as in modern Bebsi for Pepsi, so that when the Coptic translation was written, the name Shapur would easily become Sabor, as has been widely recognized. So the fact that the martyr's fame spread in the whole land of Mesopotamia specifically excludes a possible martyrdom in Egypt, and Guy concedes it is not clear that the Pharaoh in the text was king over Egypt. He has normally been equated with one of many Persian kings named Shapur. The identification with Shapur II is even clearer when one knows that the Coptic word which John Guy translates repeatedly as Pharaoh simply means king of any country, even though the word is etymologically derived from the ancient word Pharaoh. So Guy's anachronistic translation of the term as Pharaoh throughout this Coptic text is intentionally misleading, and the suggestion that Pharaoh Sabor might be a minor Egyptian ruler of Dynasty 14, known only from a single mention in the Turin King list, is phonetically impossible, and it stretches credulity. The Coptic encomium is an adapted tale from Sasanian Persia, not a native Egyptian view, and certainly not an ancient Egyptian view, nor is the Abraham in question the patriarch from the Bible, though the story does conflate differing Mesopotamian and Persian traditions for an attempted martyrdom by fire in Mesopotamia, not by knife in Egypt. Guy's article is not honest in its title, its suppression of prior important scholarship, and its presentation of the principal actors. Guy never acknowledges that the Abraham of the text is not, or even that he might not be, the patriarch Abraham. The 1908 publication remains the only reliable edition of this Coptic text. blam! He decimates the reliability of Mulstein in the church article. He absolutely eliminates, wipes out, and mops the floor with John Gee's utterly dishonest, ludicrous scholarship and article as well, in order to try to find some kind of a parallel to Abraham in the book of Abraham, and they both miserably fail. Human sacrifice on the lion couch of Abraham has been demonstrated Egyptologically to basically equate with the idea of pure, unadulterated bunk.